Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something really quite powerful, TATANKA's reimagining of Nirvana's Something in the Way.
Hmm.
You sent over an article from their website dated April 3rd, 2025, and our aim really is to understand how TATANKA takes this, incredibly well-known song and just completely reframes it and what that shift might tell us about America in 2025.
Exactly. And having TATANKA's own words from their site is, well, invaluable here. It makes it crystal clear this isn't just like a simple cover version.
No.
It's a deliberate, significant transformation.
Absolutely. Now, for anyone who might not be quite as familiar, TATANKA, they're focused on what they call radical reinventions of musical classics.
Right.
And this new take on Something in the Way is a big part of their upcoming album adaptations. But it's pretty clear from their mission statement there's a lot more going on than just playing around with music. Their bigger goal is aligning their work with global indigenous wisdom.
Which is fascinating in itself, isn't it? Why this particular song, for an entity focused on global indigenous wisdom, it really suggests a connection they're intentionally drawing.
Yeah.
A way to highlight certain themes through, well, a melody most people recognize.
And, for you, the learner, tuning in maybe to get a solid grasp without getting too bogged down, and who really values those moments where things just click.
Ah, those aha moments.
Exactly. This deep dive should offer a really compelling perspective. We're going to explore how a song you've likely heard, countless times, can be totally recontextualized to spotlight a narrative that's both different and, frankly, incredibly important.
Okay, so let's really dig into this transformation of Something in the Way. The article uses some pretty striking language.
It really does. They call Nirvana's original a haunting dirge, which, immediately sets the tone. Darkness, unease.
Then they describe their version as an indigenous requiem and a Lakota lament for the forgotten. That contrast, right off the bat, signals a huge shift, not just in sound, but in the whole point of the music.
Right. They specifically mention that while the original might bring up feelings of despair, alienation, and they sort of touched on similar ideas with their version of Creep, remember?
Oh yeah, the anthem for the marginalized in 2025 America, they called it.
Exactly. But this one, this Something in the Way, is very intentionally focused somewhere else. Ancestral trauma, cultural erasure, and the unbroken spirit of indigenous peoples, particularly the Lakota Sioux, but also indigenous communities across the Americas. What do you think made them pivot in this specific direction?
That's a really good question. The article doesn't spell out the why explicitly, but you can sort of infer they likely see a resonance, between the feeling of being lost or sort of pushed aside in the original song and the historical and ongoing experiences of indigenous peoples. By reframing it through this Lakota lens, they're giving voice to a very specific history. Dispossession, but also resilience.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do they actually do that, achieve this pretty major thematic shift? The article points to two main things: changing the lyrics and totally reinventing the music. Let's start with the lyrics.
Okay. Well, one of the most immediate, most impactful changes. The lyrics are sung entirely in Lakota.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So even if you don't understand the words themselves, that act centers the indigenous experience. It creates this cultural presence that just wasn't there before.
Right.
We do get the English translation of one key line, though. Nothing left to take, but we remain.
Such a simple line in English, but wow, it feels heavy. How does TATANKA's interpretation, in Lakota and then translated, shift its meaning from whatever Kurt Cobain originally intended?
Well, in Cobain's context, nothing left to take probably spoke to, like a personal feeling of emptiness, or maybe societal apathy.
Yeah, probably.
But when you apply it to the indigenous experience, it takes on this huge historical weight. It speaks to the literal taking of land, resources, culture. And yet it's followed by that incredibly powerful statement of survival. But we remain. It flips it from a personal lament into this declaration of enduring presence, despite just immense loss.
It's like the core feeling is maybe similar, but the context just completely reframes it. The article also says the Lakota lyrics invoke the whispers of ancestors and the pain of a people who refuse to be erased. That adds like another whole layer.
Exactly. It's not just about physical survival, is it? It's about keeping cultural memory alive, identity, in the face of attempts at erasure.
Right.
Those whispers of ancestors.
Right.
That suggests this living connection to the past, the source of strength, resilience that informs the present struggle.
Okay, so the lyrical shift is clearly massive. huge part of this transformation, but something in the way also has such a distinctive sound. How does TATANKA approach the music itself to create this indigenous requiem?
The article paints a really evocative picture of the soundscape they built. They describe it as evoking the vast windswept plains of the Lakota homelands.
Mm.
So it's not just about using different instruments. It's about creating an atmosphere that feels deeply tied to a specific place, a specific culture.
And they do this by blending drone-like ambient textures with traditional native instrumentation. What does that even sound like? And what effect does that combination have?
Well, think of the drone textures as creating this sort of expansive, almost timeless backdrop, like a sonic canvas.
Okay.
And layered onto that are the specific sounds of traditional Lakota instruments. The article highlights the steady, mournful pulse of a buffalo hide drum.
Ah.
And it describes it not just as percussion, but as the heartbeat of a people who have survived relentless oppression. That rhythmic foundation connects you, the listener, to this deep sense of history, of resilience.
That's a really powerful image. Wow. And then there are the ghostly echoes of cedar flutes, intertwined with eye-generated sonic landscapes. That's a really interesting mix, the ancient and the futuristic.
It is, isn't it? The ghostly echoes of cedar flutes obviously bring that sense of the past, tradition, maybe loss, the age-generated sonic landscapes.
Well, as I read it, that could involve maybe processing natural sounds in new ways, or creating textures that blend with the traditional instruments, adding this layer of the contemporary world interacting with these ancient sounds. It kind of reflects TATANKA's whole vision, right? Coexistence between humanity and AI. Sonically, it might create a feeling of both the enduring past and, well, an evolving present.
And the guitar, which is so central to the original song. It's described here as minimal, yet deeply evocative, favoring bowed strings and reverberating drums that suggest the spectral presence of lost generations. That sounds worlds away from Kurt Cobain's playing. Oh, completely, yeah. Instead of that more direct, often distorted guitar sound from Nirvana, TATANKA goes for textures. Textures that create a sense of haunting, but like the article says, it's a haunting tied to memory.
Right.
To the weight of history, the ancestors whose presence is still felt. Those bowed strings, the reverberating drones. They likely create these long, sustained sounds that really add to that feeling of a past that lingers.
And finally, the article mentions the voice, raw and unadorned, carrying the weight of oral tradition, embodying communal grief and defiance. That really centers the human element, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's not about technical perfection. It's about conveying shared experience resilience through the voice itself. That rawness probably just amplifies the emotional hit, connects the listener to that long tradition of storytelling, of remembrance in indigenous cultures.
So when you put all these pieces together, the Lakota lyrics, the blend of traditional and AI sounds, the specific instrumentation choices, the raw vocals, it really paints a picture of a complete transformation. It's not just a new arrangement, it's a fundamentally different song.
Absolutely. And what's really telling is how TATANKA themselves talk about the significance, the intended impact. They explicitly state that by reinterpreting the song through an indigenous lens, they are actively amplifying unheard voices of history.
That's such a powerful concept, taking a song that was so incredibly widely heard and using its structure, its familiarity, to bring forward a completely different set of voices and experiences. They even draw that direct line to their earlier work with Creep, explaining how that song became a meditation on modern alienation, whereas this rendition of Something in the Way is transformed into a sacred elegy for those who have lived and continue to live on the margins.
And that's a critical point, isn't it? It underlines that this isn't just looking back at history.
Yeah.
It's about acknowledging the ongoing realities, the struggles faced by many indigenous communities today. The song becomes this vessel for both remembrance and, contemporary awareness.
The article wraps up with a really impactful line. This is not just a song. It is a call to remember, to honor, and to resist. That bolded resist really jumps out.
It does. It reframes remembering and honoring not as passive things, but as active forms of resistance. Resistance against cultural erasure, against historical amnesia. It suggests that keeping these stories, these traditions alive, that is a powerful and necessary act in itself.
So to kind of bring it all together, this deep dive into TATANKA's AI-generated Lakota reinvention of Something in the Way really shows this profound shift taking a song rooted in personal alienation and redirecting its entire focus
Yeah.
towards the historical and ongoing struggles of indigenous peoples. Through the Lakota language, through this carefully crafted soundscape blending tradition and, well, innovation, they've created a really powerful statement, resilience and a call to remember.
Precisely. It really highlights the potential, doesn't it, for these familiar cultural touchstones, things we all know, to be repurposed.
Yeah.
Repurposed in ways that can shine a light on different perspectives, different histories, prompting us to engage with narratives we might otherwise just overlook.
This really makes you think, doesn't it? For you listening, consider how other familiar cultural touchstones, maybe other songs that are just deeply part of our collective consciousness, could be reimagined, how they could shed light on different perspectives, different histories. It really challenged us to think more deeply about the stories we tell, maybe the stories we don't tell, and the voices that need to be heard. What other familiar songs could be, recontextualized like this to tell forgotten stories or highlight marginalized experiences? It's definitely something worth mulling over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.